Namaste, beloveds. Welcome back to the Advaita channel. I will be continuing to read the essence of the Ribhu Gita. And these verses are not in order, so it's just the essence of the original text, ones that Ramana Maharshi felt were, I guess, the most poignant verses. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Mujiji. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Anantaji. Ki Jai. So the last reading ended on page 6. Nope, sorry. I couldn't find the second video a little while ago, so I got my pages turned around. Page 9, I printed this out from a PDF download online. And I believe it's holybooks.com is where I found this. And many, many other books that are free that speak to Advaita. Okay, so the last video ended on number 35, which was chapter 19, verse 21. So this reading will begin with number 36 and chapter 19, verse 60. I have difficulty pronouncing some of these words, so please bear with me. The title prior to the verses is "The sine qua non of mukti is Shiva's grace." That in which the whole universe is born and into which it is absorbed in dissolution is the Shiva self. Devoted worship of and meditation on that Shiva self of pure consciousness alone will attract Shiva's grace, which is indispensable for liberation. Chapter 20, verse 45. Those engaged in the pursuit of knowledge of the Brahman self, happening to get involved in the mundane pleasures of sex, should regard such pleasures as merely faint shadows of the bliss of the self. They should never even dream of worldly pleasures. Chapter 21, verse 28. As the self is sat, meditative contact with the self is the true sat sangha. In parentheses, association with sadhus who abide in the self. As Brahman self is the highest, association with the self is Mahat Sangha, highest association, in parentheses. So Sat Sangha is association with sadhus who abide in the self. And Mahat Sangha is the highest association, which as Brahman self is the highest. Association with the self is Mahat Sangha. Chapter 21, verse 39. The sadhaka practicing meditation on the self should always think firmly that all diversities of soul, world, and creator excuse me, are the undifferentiated Brahman self only. I practice, his consciousness is freed from thoughts, after which he should give up the above thought also, and abide always in the thought-free state of the self. It was chapter 21, verse 39. This is, excuse me, chapter 21, verse 41. Abidance in the state of thought-free alert awareness is the state of mukti, beyond thought and expression. The emergence of thought is the bondage of untold suffering. Abidance in the self is the true non-dual samadhi, and that alone leads one to the eternal bliss of mukti. So I think I'm going to read the chapter and verse after. So that was chapter 21, verse 41. The great illusions, Maya, in parentheses, associated with God Ishwara, avidya, associated with individual souls, mind and jivas, souls, world and its creator, all names and forms, and all mental conceptions are nothing but the self. One should ever abide in this conviction. Chapter 22, verse 23. All worlds and creatures are only thought forms. They are nothing but the mind, which is a bundle of thoughts, which again are nothing more than ripples in the still ocean of awareness self, and certainly nothing apart from that self. Therefore, one should abide in the firm conviction that all objects are only I am self Brahman. Chapter 22, verse 24. There are no such things as achieved objectives and the efforts leading to them. Association with the wise or the ignorant, efforts of learning and knowledge acquired, acts of inquiry and practice, the learner or the learned, and any goals achieved. What exists is only Brahman, the effulgent awareness self. Chapter 23, verse 10. One should be firm in the conviction that there are no charitable acts, sacred waters, and shestras, in parentheses, pilgrim centers. No loss or gain, and no loser or gainer, no karma, bhakti and wisdom, and no knower or known. All these thought forms are bound to be dissolved and lost in the Brahman self, which is the sole existence. Chapter 23, verse 11. The bhavana, and this is has an asterisk, and it says in verses 45 to 50, the word bhavana means I think literally it's lit period, so I think that means literally feeling in parentheses. So in verses 45 to 50, the word bhavana means feeling the faith based on the word of the teacher and the scriptures, and in the unremitting abidance in the belief thereof. So bhavana means feeling, in parentheses, the faith based on the word of the teacher and the scriptures, and in the unremitting abidance in the belief thereof. That sounded better. So, verse 45, the bhavana, I am Brahman self, swiftly takes one to mukti. As the continued reading of the text generating that bhavana takes the aspirant unerringly to the goal, he should always dwell on the written words dealing with the Brahman self. Chapter 24, verse 27. Verse 46. The illusion that one is the body and that the world is the basic reality has remained soaked over a long, long time and cannot be got rid of by the casual reading and mere understanding of the truth. The basic illusion can be effaced only by a long and unremitting practice of the bhavana that all this is, in quotes, I am Brahman self. Chapter 24, verse 28. Everything is only a concoction of time, space, and energy. All else is the trite talk of people who dislike the effort of sadhana, which takes them to the self. This talk is based on their dense ignorance of the self. Only by persistent practice and experience of sadhana can one arrive at the truth that all concepts of souls, world, and the cause thereof are just evanescent shadows on the screen of Shiva self Brahman. Chapter 24, verse 31. There is never such a thing as conception of names, excuse me. There is never such a thing as conception of names and forms. No such thing as the conceiving mind. No such thing as a person lost in samsara. And no such things as the world and its creator. Everything that is seen to exist must be realized to be no other than the soul, pure, Awareness being Brahman self. Chapter 25, verse 8. So this next section is titled, Everything is Sat Chit Ananda, Self Only. Verse 49. Whatever is found to exist is Sat, in parentheses, existence only. Whatever is pleasurable is Ananda, bliss only. Excuse me. One should ever abide in the bedrock bhavana of Sat Chit Ananda. Never for once should one slip, even inadvertently, into the disastrous bhavana that one is the body and that the world is real. Chapter 25, verse 12. One should abide in the rock-firm bhavana that everything is only Brahman self, and I am that Brahman self, in quotes. By this bhavana, all thought movements and nescience will disappear, resulting in the eternal abidance in the soul Sat Chit Ananda self. Chapter 25, verse 14. By abiding in the self, the wandering mind is reduced to perfect stillness after being freed from all nescience and thought currents. It gets lost in the Sat Chit Ananda self, in the same way that water is lost when mixed with milk. This unitary state of abidance in the self is called Atmanishta by the wise who have attained perfection. Chapter 26, verse 2. This next section is titled Sahajanishta, or the natural state. Having realized that the world picture on the screen self is evanescent and essentially non-existent, one should ever remain still and blissful in the firm conviction of ever being the sole Brahman self only. This conviction should be maintained even while functioning as an individual in the world of name and form. This matured state of abidance in the self is called Sahajanishta, the natural state, in brackets. Chapter 26, verse 3. In that blissful self, wherein there is no action of body, speech, and mind, no virtuous or sinful karma, action in brackets, and the fruits thereof, one should remain still, eschewing the least trace of thought. I'm going to read that again. In that blissful self, wherein there is no action of body, speech, and mind, no virtuous or sinful karma, and the fruits thereof, one should remain still, eschewing the least trace of thought. Chapter 26, verse 7. In that self, wherein there is neither conceiver nor conception of the world of names and forms, one should remain blissfully still, eschewing the least trace of thought. Chapter 26, verse 8. In that self, wherein desire, anger, covetousness, confusion, bigotry, and envy are all absent, in that self wherein there is no thought of bondage or release, one should abide blissfully still, eschewing the least ripple of thought. Chapter 26, verse 13. And now I missed a asterisk on verse 51. And it says at the bottom, verses 51 to 60 herein deal with practice of Abheda Nishta or Atmanishta, which is non-dual state or abidance in the self. So this whole section here is dealing with the practice of Abheda Nishta or Atmanishta, the non-dual state or abidance in the self. Firmly abiding in the self, one acquires the totality of all knowledge and achieves the successful completion of all endeavors and duties. In that state, one should abide blissful and still, eschewing the least ripple of thought. Chapter 26, verse 25. Around verse 57. So verse 57 is the verse in the essence of the Ribhu Gita. And at the end of that verse, it gives the chapter and verse in the original Gita, Ribhu Gita. Mind merged completely in the self, one becomes a lord without rival, steeped in bliss beyond compare. Mind merged completely in the self, one becomes a lord without rival, steeped in bliss beyond compare. In that state, one should abide still, free from the least trace of thought. Chapter 26, verse 28. I am that self, which is integral existence, awareness, bliss, the sole impartite Brahman self. Firm in the conviction born of this experience, one should abide still, free from the least trace of thought. Chapter 26, verse 29. In the conviction that I am the self, in quotes, in which no thought, ego, desire, mind, or confusion can exist, one should abide still, free from trace of thought. I'm going to read that again. In the conviction that I am the self, in which no thought, ego, desire, mind, or confusion can exist, one should abide still, free from trace of thought. Chapter 26, verse 31. Verse 60. The firm faith of being the self is sufficient to dispel all thought and establish one in Brahman self. In due course of this practice, even the thought involved in that faith fades away, leading to the spontaneous effulgence of the self. If a person hearkens to this teaching and practices the faith, even if he is a great sinner, he is washed clean of all his sins and is established in Brahman self. Chapter 26, verse 42. There is certainly no such thing as mind with its constituents of thought and thought forms of objects. In this conviction, one should ever abide still and at peace, in the state of thought free, alert, awareness self, which endures after all sadhanas and its rigors have exhausted themselves in Brahman self. Chapter 27, verse 29. Having gained the experience that there is no creator, no Maya, no duality, and no objects at all, and that pure awareness self alone exists, one should ever remain still and peaceful in that state of selfhood. Chapter 27, verse 34. If a person gives heed to these teachings, he would certainly gain the grace of Lord Shiva and attain the state of selfhood, even though he is immersed in the dense darkness of nescience, which could not be banished by the glare of a million suns. Chapter 27, verse 43. Let's see where we're at here. So I think I'll read and end on verse 69 and then pick it back up on verse 70 in the next reading. So we're on verse 64. Why waste words? This is the truth in a nutshell. Only those who have earned the grace of our Lord Shiva by long devotional worship will get the rare opportunity of reading this scriptural text, which leads to the bliss of peace everlasting in Brahman self. Chapter 27, verse 44. Only that Jnani who teaches, thou art the thought-free, alertly aware, absolutely still, ever blissful, intensely peaceful, unqualified Brahman self, in quotes, is the true Sat Guru, and others are not. I'm going to read that again. Only that Jnani who teaches, thou art the thought-free, alertly aware, absolutely still, ever blissful, intensely peaceful, unqualified Brahman self, is the true Sat Guru, and others are not. Chapter 28, verse 28. Unbroken abidance in the state of alert awareness, unruffled by thoughts, is self-realization. That is at once the spotless Jivanmukti and the magnificent Videhamukti. This state is easily attainable only for those who have earned the divine grace of Shiva by deep devotion to him, and not for others. What is stated here is the import in a nutshell of the message of that charming crest jewel of the Vedas known as the Upanishads. Chapter 29, verse 37. Verse 67, this is a long one. Those who give heed to this message and abide in accordance with it will forthwith attain mukti, liberation, in brackets. They will not suffer from the least particle of affliction. They will enjoy a bliss far greater than the bliss attained from this and all other worlds. They and their environments will be filled with the plenitude of auspicious events. Totally free from all trace of fear, they will never again enter the cycle of births and deaths. They will become the immutable Brahman self. All this, we swear, is the truth beyond doubt. By our Lord Shiva, again and again, we swear that this is the fundamental truth. Chapter 29, verse 40. That state of still, pure, effulgent awareness is moksha, the state beyond compare. Those who maintain an unbroken abidance in that supreme state will never more be touched by suffering or confusion and will be absolved from all duties. Such duties, if any, will somehow be completed without any volition on their part. They will eternally abide as the sole supreme self. Chapter 30, verse 31. This is verse 39. 69. By the persistent and continued bhavana, and there's an asterisk, in all the 13 verses of chapter 32, the term bhavana is to be understood as faith or firm belief in Aham Brahman, in brackets, I am the self. And I'll reread that at the beginning of the next reading to remind us. So by the persistent and continued bhavana of I am the Brahman self, in quotes, All thoughts and feelings of differentiation of self and non-self will drop off, and permanent abidance in Brahman self will be achieved. This bhavana is possible only for those with a keen, inquiring mind, intent on knowing the self, and not for those who are indifferent about self-knowledge. Chapter 32, verse 18. And it looks like our next reading is going to contain quite a bit of chapter 32. So that's the reading for today. Thank you for your presence here. I will hopefully be reading live next week when things have calmed down around the house. So, namaste. Om Shri Sadguru Shri Ramana Ki Jai. Om Satguru Shri Mujiji Ki Jai. Om Satguru Anantaji Ki Jai.